Welcome everyone to the awards ceremony for the Michel Déon Prize for 2020. My name is Michael Cronin, Chair of the Michel Déon Prize jury, and I will be acting as MC for tonight's ceremony. I would like to begin by extending a warm welcome to all our shortlisted authors and to all the guests who are with us from both near and afar on the occasion of this award ceremony. I would like to encourage you as guests to use the chat feature to make comments and pass on your congratulations and words of encouragement to our authors this evening. Rebecca Solnit, the great American non-fiction writer, in A Field Guide to Getting Lost, tried to tease out the difference between fiction and non-fiction. She argued that fiction was like painting, non-fiction like photography. Fiction allows you to start with a blank canvas, but the non-fiction writer, like the photographer, must find form and pattern in the stuff already out there. In the months of deliberations, as my fellow jury members read through over 60 eligible titles to arrive at the present shortlist, we too were concerned with finding a form and pattern in the extraordinary variety and expressiveness of contemporary Irish non-fiction writing. What stood out this year in the best of the writing was the overwhelming sense of an ethical obligation to the subject being written about. There was a repeated desire to develop a form, detect a pattern that would do justice to a life lived, a life lost, or a life sacrificed. In a world increasingly hostage to the exclusive orthodoxy of borders, Irish non-fiction writers have become adept at a form of artistic contraband, ignoring predefined boundaries of subject, genre, and place. They collectively remind us pandemics do not have a monopoly on uncertainty, and much more than our uncertainties, it is our certainties that we have to fear. Sylvain Tesson, dans son tout dernier livre La Panthère des Neiges, où il traque la bête mythique au Tibet avec son ami photographe Vincent Mounier, loue les vertus de la patience, les bienfaits de l'attente. Il avoue clairement que l'affût commande de tenir son âme en haleine. L'exercice m'avait révélé un secret, on gagne toujours à augmenter les réglages de sa propre fréquence de réception. La collaboration avec l'Académie française autour du prix Michel Déon est justement l'un de ces exercices qui permettent d'augmenter les réglages de notre propre fréquence de réception ici en Irlande. En honorant la mémoire de l'illustre membre de l'Académie que fut Michel Déon, nos deux académies œuvrent pour pérenniser sa contribution à l'amitié et aux échanges entre nos deux peuples. Il est tout à fait juste, en ces temps incertains, que nos institutions collaborent pour favoriser l'éclosion de la littérature dans toutes ses modalités. Les écrivains, quelle que soit leur forme d'expression, cherchent à élucider des vérités qui sont parfois incommodes, mais sans lesquelles nos sociétés risquent de sombrer dans une complaisance mortifère. I would now like to call on Mr. Simon Coveney, TD, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defence, on behalf of our funders, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, to say a few words.
Thank you, Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, Madame et Messieurs, it's an honour for me to join you tonight to celebrate the third edition of the Michel Déon Prize-giving ceremony. I would have liked to be welcoming you in person to Ivy House this evening, where we were proud to host the inaugural award ceremony for the Michel Déon Prize 2 years ago. But this year presented particular challenges for the organisation of the prize. And I would like to start by thanking Professor Michael Cronin, Karen Muldowney, and all of the team at the RIA, as well as the staff here in my department, for adapting to the new circumstances and reimagining this year's award ceremony. The cultural sector has suffered disproportionately the effects of the ongoing pandemic. As a government, we have taken steps to protect the creative sector, and this continues to be a priority focus for Minister Catherine Martin in particular. It's also a priority of mine and of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Ireland is increasingly putting culture at the heart of its relations with other countries, and we are showcasing the talent and creativity of our world-class artists globally. This ambition spurred us to create this award in partnership with the RIA in 2018. In this challenging context, we are particularly delighted to be supporting the Michel Déon Prize again this year in order to recognise and reward the contribution of talented writers. 6 talented authors join us tonight in recognition of their talent, their originality, the contribution they have made to our collective understanding. Before we are introduced to each of the authors and their fantastic works, I would like to briefly recall the man who brought us together tonight to celebrate the art of writing. Michel Déon was and remains a towering figure in French literature, a member of the prestigious Académie Française and the winner of numerous literary awards. We established this award in 2018 in honour of his immensely talented and highly decorated career, and of the special bond he had with Ireland, having moved here in the 70s. Irish and French people have always displayed a mutual interest in and appreciation for the cultural life, political affairs and societal development of each other's lands. France, and Paris in particular, has for centuries been both a shelter and a muse for Irish writers, from Oscar Wilde and James Joyce to Eileen Gray and Samuel Beckett, right up to today's generation of artists in residence at the Centre Culturel Irlandais and an institute that we are proud to support. France too has dispatched its artists to Ireland, and they in turn have found inspiration for their creative work among the landscapes and people of this country. In Déon's words, he has learned to love Ireland and appreciate open-mindedness, its independence of spirit, its courage, its hope, and its humanity. By honouring Michel Déon's legacy, this prize seeks to celebrate and further develop our strong ties with France. The Franco-Irish partnership across all sectors is inspired and buttressed by the enduring friendships of our people. This is reflected in Ireland's strategy for France, which we launched last year and which places culture and people-to-people links at the centre of efforts to deepen our relationship and friendship with France. In concluding, I would like to thank the Royal Irish Academy and the esteemed judges for considering a long list of nominees and distilling it down to 6 very worthy shortlisted candidates with us tonight. I would like to thank Pierre, Joannon, Ireland's Honorary Consul in the south of France and close friend of Michel Déon, for the critical role he has played in conceiving this prize, working closely with Secretary-General Niall Burgess and 2 embassies in Dublin and in Paris. All that is left for me to do is to wish bon chance to the 6 shortlisted authors and wish you all an enjoyable evening. Merci et bonne soirée.
Very many thanks, Minister Coveney, for those words and for your department's continued support for the prize, which is very much appreciated. I would now like to introduce Mr. Pierre Joannon, Honorary Consulate General of Ireland in the south of France, and who was a close friend of Michel Déon. He will pay tribute to the celebrated French writer who loved Ireland and made County Galway his home from the early 1970s until his death in December 2016. Before handing over to Pierre, I would like to offer a special note of thanks to Alice Déon, Michel's daughter, for giving us some wonderful photos of her father.
May I introduce myself? I am a historian specialized in Irish history, and as well I am the Honorary Irish Consul General in the southeast of France. I was appointed at that post in 1973. 1973 is also the year during which Michel Déon published his award-winning novel on Ireland, Un Taxi Mauve, The Purple Taxi, which was adapted into a film with Peter Ustinov, Charlotte Rampling, Fred Astaire and Philippe Noiret. This film and this book sent thousands of French people across the Irish Sea. From that time onwards, I was very eager to make acquaintance with Michel Déon for at least 3 reasons. First of all, I considered him as the major writer of French literature at the time. In 1970, he had published what I consider as one of the most important post-war novels in French literature, Les Poneys Sauvages, the Wild Ponies. The second reason is that Michel Déon had something very particular. Unlike most of the writers and the novelists and the intellectuals, he was not confined in the 6th arrondissement of Paris, but he was open to the wild world. He had been living in Italy, he had been living in Portugal, in Greece, and now, since the early 70s, he was living in Ireland. And that's the third reason why I wanted to meet him, because we shared this love of Ireland, this love of the Irish people and of Irish culture. Eventually, I was able to meet him in 1975 in the old rectory in Tina, where he had settled and where he would live until the end of his life, where he died in the Galway Clinic on the 28th of December 2016. We were used to meet either at Tina, the old rectory, or sometime at Moran's at Kilcolgan, where we were swallowing the best oysters in the world, and also in Clonbur, where I had a holiday house and where Michel was coming every year to celebrate his birthday on the 4th of August. But we would meet also in Paris and also in my hometown in Antibes, where we had found, Michel and I, a literary prize bearing the name of a very famous French playwright and writer, Jacques Audiberti. Michel was really in love with Ireland, like with the west of Ireland particularly. He was not as keen as I was on Dublin. He was more a Colchi than a Jackeen. He loved the landscape, he loved the people whom he saw daily, because Chantal, his wife, was running a stud farm in the old rectory. But he also loved Irish culture. Of course, the big names of Irish culture like Joyce, like Yeats, like Beckett, but also the contemporary ones like Seamus Heaney, like John McGahern, and like John Banville, for example, to quote only a few. And I must confess that Michel was really the best intercessor between Ireland and France. He was used to invite many journalists in the old rectory, and all these journalists making the pilgrimage to County Galway were also devoting a lot of space to Ireland, and therefore it was a bonus for Bordfulshire and for all the people who loved Ireland and wanted to make acquaintance with the old ground. But more than that, since he got elected in 1978 at the Académie Française, he very quickly and very discreetly became one of the best dispensators of literary prize, of grants, and of high distinction. And numerous were the Irish scholars who benefited from this influence and this generosity. Indeed, Michel Déon was the best French ambassador in Ireland and the best Irish ambassador to France. And it's a fitting tribute to his qualities and to his unique role in the field of Franco-Irish cultural relations that the Royal Irish Academy and the Department of Foreign Affairs have founded this literary prize for non-fiction works that we are seeing today being awarded. This literary prize given in Dublin is matched by a similar literary prize awarded by the illustrious Académie Française for a work of fiction. And I think that really the coming together of the two most important cultural institutions in our two countries, to celebrate the memory of Michel Déon is a very, very sound and very true recognition of his role and of his status as one of the best French writers, as a marvelous friend, and as a man who, like the old Normans, became more Irish than the Irish themselves.
The first writer on our shortlist I would like to introduce is Sinead Gleeson, author of Constellations, Reflections from Life, published by Picador. Constellations is an absorbing series of reflections on how a body experiences sickness, health, motherhood. The private body, in turn, becomes a way into narrating the larger public story of life in Ireland for women down through the decades. From hair to hospitals, the Writing Sharply contests received notions around the body and womanhood. Sinead, this was a debut collection of essays for you, and it has been such a success. #1 Irish bestseller and winner of the Non-Fiction Book of the Year at the 2019 An Post Irish Book Awards. Do you think essays will continue to grow within the non-fiction category?
I do think the essay will continue to grow, and I think for a long time in Irish writing, the dominant form was both the novel and the short story. So fiction, I think we all assumed that the only way to tell a story was through the method of fiction. And to me, fiction is an act of imagination, whereas non-fiction, and particularly the essay, is an act of inquiry. It's an act of interrogation. And I think we've come through a huge period of change in Irish writing. And the ideal place, the ideal vehicle in terms of writing for me to ask those questions and try and answer those questions is the essay. It's a very elastic, very malleable kind of form. And I think it accommodates all sorts of subjects, whether they're personal, as some of the parts of my book are, or broader. I talk about art and science and politics and history in my book. And the essay is a very expansive form that allows you to do that. And I think for a long time, people thought essay meant school. And now we've realized it's a very modern and very flexible form in order to make an argument and to be a writer. So I think more people are going to be drawn to it with, my own book and Ian Maleney's book, who's also nominated, is a book of essays. So yeah, I think so.
Thanks, Sinead. The next writer on our shortlist I would like to introduce is Caelainn Hogan, author of Republic of Shame, published by Penguin Random House. Republic of Shame, Stories from Ireland's Institutions for Fallen Women, catalogues the treatment of women in mother and baby homes and the Magdalen laundries. In combining personal testimony with archival investigation, Caelainn Hogan details a deeply disturbing story of church-state complicity in the mistreatment of young women. In her account, personal damage constantly shadows institutional misbehaviour. Caelainn, this was your first book. What drew you to the subject of the religious-run institutions in Ireland?
I started writing this book at a time when the country and when I was grappling with the way that children had died and were buried in Tuam. And it was also a time of real change in the country, change that was catalyzed in many ways by the breaking of silences around what happened in these institutions and how women and their children were treated by church and state. And as I started speaking with survivors, I realized how many people were still searching for answers, how many people were still searching for each other, searching for where their children were buried. And I realized this was affecting people I knew, it was affecting people my own age. This was not the past, it was an ongoing legacy. And I wanted to understand how a system of institutionalization, how this shame industrial complex was created and how it was normalized for so long.
Many thanks, Caelainn. The next writer on our shortlist I would like to introduce is Margaret Kelleher, author of the Mam Trasna Murders, Language, Life and Death in 19th Century Ireland, published by UCD Press. The Mam Trasna Murders is an account of a shocking miscarriage of justice in late 19th century Ireland, where an innocent man was hung on the basis of evidence in a language he did not understand. Margaret Kelleher uses the case of Miles Joyce and his co-accused to tease out the complexities of language relationships in the Ireland of the period and how who gets to say what in which language is rarely a neutral issue. Margaret, as Professor and Chair of Anglo-Irish Literature and Drama at University College Dublin, do you feel Irish non-fiction is enjoying something of a golden age?
I think this is a golden age for Irish non-fiction for a number of reasons, and perhaps one of the most important is the role of publishers. Publishers have had the courage to make new forms of stories available through non-fiction, through essay, through memoir. But I also think there is a darker side to this, and this is so evident in the shortlist this year, that many of these stories are stories of loss, of neglect, of violence, of injustice, stories that have taken, in some cases, decades, even centuries to be told. And that itself suggests an aspect to Irish non-fiction today that is certainly not golden, but vital.
Many thanks, Margaret. The next writer on our shortlist I would like to introduce is Ian Maleney, author of Minor Monuments, published by Tramp Press. Minor Monuments is an extended meditation on the nature of belonging and place. Ian Maleney engages with the necessity of memory and its inherent fragility, with the ways in which our senses, particularly sound, try to make sense of where we have been. The Irish Midlands in his work becomes a resonant centre, the heartlands of recall and retrieval. Ian, you're a writer, freelance journalist and web developer, and this is your first book. Have you any advice for other aspiring non-fiction writers?
For me, non-fiction has always been about listening as much as it is about writing. I think, I started off as a journalist, really reporting and interviewing people. And for me, writing non-fiction in a kind of longer form sense was really just about expanding what I was doing as a journalist, and then kind of brushing up against the limitations of journalism, I suppose, or what I felt to be the limitations of the kind of journalism that I was doing, and then trying to push beyond that and finding a form that would really work, that would allow me to bring in all the different things that I wanted to bring in, be that sound or be it different types of writing or different parts of history or whatever, and they made sense in my head, but they might not necessarily make sense in a traditional piece of journalism. So I was really looking for a way to do that. And I think a lot of people at the minute are seeing essay writing as a way of doing that, of kind of poetically and creatively bringing together a disparate set of threads in a way that makes sense to the individual and hopefully makes sense to the readers as well.
Thanks, Ian. The next writer on our shortlist I would like to introduce is Eilish Ní Roimhne, the author of 12,000 Days, a memoir of love and loss, published by Blackstaff Press. 12,000 Days is a love story and a lament. A love story that describes the coming together of the renowned folklorist Bo Almquist and the author, and a lament for a life that no longer is. Eilish Ní Roimhne's memoir is unsparing in its critique of a health service that failed her late husband in important ways, and deeply moving in its evocation of the joys of a shared affection. Eilish, your first collection of stories was published in 1988, Blood and Water, and since then you've written 25 books, including novels, collections of short stories, several books for children, plays and non-fiction works. Do you feel it's particularly difficult for non-fiction writers to get the recognition they deserve?
I think in some ways there is a lot more opportunity for writers of fiction, especially the novel, to get a huge amount of recognition internationally and in the media than there is for non-fiction writers. That said, my personal experience of writing this memoir after many, many works of fiction is that I got a kind of recognition that I value very much, which is personal recognition, lots and lots of emails and letters from individual readers. So that's extremely gratifying that you kind of know your book has reached out to somebody. Otherwise, reviews, etc., I thought that was all pretty good in the Irish context. The area where it falls down, where you get less recognition is, I think, internationally, and the works of non-fiction are not eligible for the big prizes, like the huge ones that we all hear about all the time.
Many thanks, Ailish. The next and final writer on our shortlist I would like to introduce is Conor O'Clery, author of The Shoemaker and His Daughter, published by Penguin Random House. The Shoemaker and His Daughter is a remarkable story of a family whose lives are intimately bound up with the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. Conor O'Clery vividly recreates the fates of ordinary citizens caught up in extraordinary events, and show how history is not an empty abstraction, but a lived reality. His account bears witness to the unsettling vulnerability and heartening resilience of humans in times of crisis. Conor, you worked for the Irish Times for over 30 years in various positions, including news editor and foreign correspondent, and you've written a number of books. What made you decide to tell the story of your wife's family now?
Well, my wife's Armenian and her family comes from the Caucasus. And during the last century, the family had to move due to circumstances from the Caucasus and they end up in Siberia. And the story of their family travails and the circumstances under which they had to live in the Soviet Union and Russia also reflected the history of the Soviet Union and Russia itself. And I realized that by telling Jana's family story, I was able to, in a way, convey the history through the back door of the Soviet Union and Russia. And I think that it illustrates how ordinary people, decent people, can survive under different circumstances. And under Stalin's Russia and under Putin's Russia, they get on with their lives, and that's what the story is about.
Thanks, Conor. And that concludes the introductions to our 6 shortlisted authors and their books. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mary Canning, President of the Royal Irish Academy, who will speak to you and announce the winner of the 2020 Michel Déon Prize.
On behalf of the Royal Irish Academy, I am delighted to welcome you all to this online awards ceremony for the Academy's 2020 Michel Déon Prize for Non-Fiction. It is such a shame that we could not do this in person this evening because of circumstances, but it is a great honour to be able to award the €10,000 prize. The Michel Déon Prize is a joint venture between the Royal Irish Academy and the Académie Française, and it is yet another successful collaboration for us with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who are funding the prize. Our thanks go to Simon Coveney, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defence, and to Pierre, Joannon, Honorary Consul General of Ireland and friend of Michel Déon. Both spoke so eloquently earlier. I look forward to continuing the successful partnership as a fitting tribute to a great writer, and this will sustain his legacy in celebrating the richness and diversity of the cultural experience in Europe. We first awarded the prize in 2018 to Brendan McSughna for his book, The End of Outrage, Post-Famine Adjustments in Rural Ireland. And he delivered the Michel Déon Lecture in Paris in December 2019. And this was organised by the Irish Embassy in Paris, and we would like to thank the Irish Ambassador, Patricia O'Brien, and her team for working so closely with us in making this prize a success. Also in December 2019, our partners in the Académie Française officially awarded their Michel Déon Prize to fiction writer Stéphane Hoffmann for Les Belles Ambitieuses, and we look forward to meeting him when he delivers his Michel Déon lecture in Ireland as soon as circumstances permit. So back to this evening. In particular, I would like to thank our judging panel chaired by Professor Michael Cronin, and they had the onerous task of whittling down the entries to a short list of 6. We are delighted to have our shortlisted authors with us this evening. Sinead Gleeson, Caelainn Hogan, Margaret Kelleher, Ian Maleney, Eilish Ní and Conor O'Cleary. They are all to be congratulated for making it into this shortlist for such a competitive prize, and that we had such a great breadth and quality of entrants. Now, I know you're all eagerly awaiting and anticipating the announcement of the winner. So I will now reveal that the winner of the Michel Déon Prize for Nonfiction 2020 is a book that the judges felt was a very accomplished piece of work that brought history to life and with a broad European dimension. The winning author is Conor O'Cleary for his book, The Shoemaker and His Daughter, which has been published by Penguin Random House. My warmest congratulations to you, Conor. And before I hand over to you to say a few words, I want to add a personal note. I read this book when it was first published with huge interest because I had worked for so long in the Russian Federation and in Armenia, and even visited Krasnoyarsk. And for me, it resonated not just for its compassion and insight into the trials of a family, but for its record of a time and a system. Thank you very much, Conor, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'd just like to say, first of all, that I'm honored to be in the company of Sinead and Caelainn and Margaret and Ian and Eilish. And to be in that company is in itself an honor. And it's a terrific honor to have my name associated in any way with Michel Déon. And I would like to thank you, Mary Canning, and the Professor Michael Cronin and the judging panel, obviously for the decision that they've reached. I'd like to also just mention my editor on this book, which was originally commissioned by Transworld, Brian Langan, who inspired the story, suggested it to me, and did the hard work of editing it. Obviously, the story is dedicated to Joannon and her family. It's actually dedicated to Joannon's mother, Marietta, who began her life as a child in Nagorno-Karabakh. And it's a quite astonishing coincidence that Nagorno-Karabakh is in the news today. Joanna still has family there, Marietta has family there, and they live in the town of Mardakert, which has been come under bombardment in the last couple of days. It's in Nagorno-Karabakh, not far from the border. I stayed there once with Shanna and her mother, and this was some years ago, and it was supposed to be peaceful, but every night they were shooting, and this was a hot war that never actually cooled off. And we're all, of course, very worried about what will happen now. The central person in the story is Jana's father, whom I got to know and love very much. He was a person in a million. He was a shoemaker. He did everything he could for his family. He handed over his money to Marietta. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He loved cars, and he bought a car and sold it at a profit, which is now the cornerstone of modern Russia, is buying and selling things at a profit. But he was put in jail for 6 years for the crime of speculation. And he had to move the family. They were in Grozny then, because Jana's mother had emigrated with her mother from Nagorno-Karabakh to Grozny. And because of the shame of the prison sentence, he transferred the family to Siberia. The prison wasn't in Siberia, but the family moved to Siberia. And during the period that I write about, Jana's family experienced the fear of Stalin repression. Her grandparents slept at night with a suitcase packed, fearful of the secret police coming to take them away because they were members of a certain faction of the Communist Party. Then they moved to Grozny, which was twice destroyed since they lived there. And I went to Grozny, which now we associated with ruined buildings and extremism. And their house was so wonderful. It was Mediterranean-style climate, they had fruit trees in the garden, and they lived the normal life of what we would consider middle class in any country in the world. They moved to Krasnoyarsk, where Jana's father managed to become a very successful shoemaker. He made shoes for the wife of the party chief, ironically. She was a bit of an Imelda Marcos. And he was able to provide for his family there. He built a dacha in the countryside. They grew all their own fruit and vegetables. And of course, when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of their savings were wiped out. And then they had to cope with a new situation where shoes could be imported cheaply from all over the world. And by sheer coincidence, I met Jana in Moscow in the late 1980s, and we got married and moved to Washington, and Jana got involved with the World Bank's efforts to help privatize Russia. And she found herself going back to Russia to meet with particularly Boris Nemtsov, whose daughter came to stay with us once and who has been assassinated since, right at the walls of the Kremlin as the main liberal opponent of the people in the Kremlin today. So I obviously can't conclude this without saying that the story has been described in one review as a love story, which it is. And I would like to just say that I am so privileged in life to marry into the Suvorov family. And I want to say that Jana's mother was so much a part of this book, and she was mourning the death of Stanislav when we began to discuss the book. And I think it actually helped her to cope with her grief. And in the end, she became a terrific supporter of the book. So once again, I'd like to say thank you very much to the Royal Irish Academy. This is a fantastic honor. And I have nothing more to say except again, thank you very much.
Heartiest congratulations to our most worthy winner and to all of the writers whose works featured on the shortlist. I would like to thank you all for joining us for this wonderful award ceremony. Please do use the chat function on your screens to post your congratulations and best wishes. The award ceremony has now ended. Bonne nuit agus banigi goléir salt as a gweidele don líe.